The forest was supposed to be quiet at this hour. No wind, no birds, no insects, just silence. But silence, I've learned, doesn't always mean nothing is there. Sometimes it means something is listening. That night, as my flashlight beam cut through the trees, I felt it again, that heavy pressure in the air, the kind you feel right before a storm, or right before something goes wrong. I didn't know it yet, but that feeling would change how I see the world forever. Most of us grow up believing cryptids are just stories, campfire tales, internet myths, creatures invented to scare kids or get clicks online. Bigfoot,
Dogman,
Mothman, Skinwalkers, strange humanoids seen in the woods, deserts, mountains, and backroads across the world. We laugh, we scroll past, and we tell ourselves there's no way any of it could be real. But what if that belief isn't entirely our own? What if it was taught to us, carefully and intentionally? I never set out to investigate cryptids. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just a normal person who enjoyed hiking, night drives, and listening to unsolved mystery podcasts. Like most people, I thought the idea of hidden creatures sounded exciting but unrealistic. That changed when I started noticing patterns, small details that didn't add up. Police reports that vanished. News stories that were quietly edited or deleted. Eyewitnesses who suddenly went silent or changed their stories. And above all, the same locations appearing again and again, as if something was being contained rather than discovered. Across the world, people from completely different cultures describe eerily similar beings. Tall figures moving unnaturally fast through forests. Glowing eyes seen on empty roads at night. Creatures that seem intelligent, aware, and almost curious about humans. These aren't ancient legends copied from one another. Many of these reports come from modern times, from ordinary people with no reason to lie. Truck drivers, park rangers, soldiers, farmers, even police officers. People who risk their reputations just by speaking out. What's even stranger is how often official explanations feel rushed. A bear. A hoax. A misidentified animal. But bears don't stand upright for minutes at a time. They don't mimic human voices. They don't disappear without tracks. And hoaxes don't usually involve multiple witnesses who don't know each other, all describing the same terrifying details. Yet every time the conversation gets too close to something real, it gets shut down, laughed away, buried under ridicule. I started collecting stories quietly. Not to publish, not to go viral, just to understand. Late-night emails from people who didn't want their names used. Voice notes sent from disposable accounts. Messages that began with, "I've never told anyone this before." The fear in their words was real. Not the excitement of someone chasing attention, but the exhaustion of someone carrying a secret for years. Many said the same thing. After their encounter, someone contacted them. Sometimes it was local authorities. Sometimes it was men who didn't clearly identify themselves. The message was always similar. Stop talking, forget what you saw, move on. One story still keeps me awake. A man who worked near a national park described seeing something massive cross the road in front of his vehicle. Not running, not charging, just calmly walking, as if it knew the road belonged to it. He slammed the brakes, heart pounding, and locked eyes with something that should not exist. When he reported it, the report was taken seriously, too seriously. His statement was sealed. He was told it was for public safety reasons. The next day, the area was closed for maintenance. No explanation. No follow-up. If cryptids aren't real, why the secrecy? Why the military involvement near certain hotspots? Why do satellite images sometimes blur specific regions where sightings cluster? Why do search and rescue cases in these areas have details that are never released to the public? People go missing in forests every year, and the official stories often don't match the evidence left behind. Boots found miles away. Clothing folded neatly. Phones discovered with strange audio recordings that are never made public. Some researchers believe cryptids are undiscovered species, survivors from ancient times that learned to avoid us. Others think they're something stranger, interdimensional beings, creatures that don't fully exist in our reality unless conditions are right. I don't claim to know what they are. What I do know is that too many intelligent people are seeing something, and too many powerful institutions are working hard to keep the subject framed as a joke. The cover-up doesn't look like a single secret organization pulling strings. It's more subtle than that. Ridicule is a powerful tool. Once a topic becomes embarrassing, serious discussion dies on its own. Scientists avoid it. Journalists won't touch it. Witnesses doubt themselves. And just like that, the truth stays hidden in plain sight. Not because no one knows, but because no one wants to be the one who says it out loud. As I dug deeper, I realized cryptids aren't just about creatures. They challenge how we understand reality. If even one of these beings is real, it means we don't fully control our planet. It means there are things moving through our world without permission, without explanation. And that idea terrifies systems built on control and certainty. It's easier to say people are mistaken than to admit we don't know everything. That night in the forest, when the silence pressed in around me, I finally understood why so many witnesses described the same feeling. It wasn't just fear. It was the realization of being observed, of sharing space with something that didn't care whether you believed in it or not. Something that existed long before stories, before cameras, before excuses. I never saw the creature clearly. I only heard movement, slow and deliberate, circling just beyond the reach of my light. I stood frozen, telling myself all the logical explanations I'd been trained to believe. But none of them explained why every instinct in my body was screaming at me to leave. And when I finally did, when I reached the edge of the trees and looked back one last time, I noticed something that still doesn't make sense. The forest wasn't empty anymore. And whatever was out there had no intention of staying hidden forever. I didn't run. That's what surprised me most afterward. Every part of me wanted to turn and sprint, but my legs stayed locked in place, like my body understood something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. The flashlight shook in my hand as I scanned the tree line. Shadows stretched and collapsed as the beam moved, playing tricks on my eyes. Still, I felt it, that unmistakable sense of presence. Not aggressive. Not curious, just aware, as if the forest itself had leaned closer. When I finally managed to step backward, every movement felt loud. My boots crunching leaves sounded like explosions in the silence. I kept expecting something to charge, to rush me from the dark, but nothing did. Whatever was there didn't need to hurry. That thought stayed with me long after I reached my car and locked the doors. As I drove away, I checked the rearview mirror again and again, half expecting to see glowing eyes following the road. I never did, but the relief didn't come. For days after that night, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Fatigue. Imagination. A primal fear triggered by isolation. I went back to my routine, but something had shifted. I started noticing how often cryptid sightings happen near places like where I'd been, protected land, restricted zones, areas labeled as dangerous or off-limits. Places where cameras were rare and explanations were easy to control. The more I looked, the more the pattern repeated. That's when I reached out to someone I trusted, an old friend named Mark who worked seasonal jobs with wildlife services. He wasn't a believer, at least not openly. But he had stories he'd never shared publicly. Over coffee, he spoke quietly, eyes scanning the room even though we were alone. He told me about radio calls that went unanswered, about coworkers who refused to work night shifts in certain areas, about instructions to log strange findings under animal activity, no matter how unusual they were. Mark never used the word cryptid. He didn't need to. He described tracks too large and too symmetrical to belong to any known animal. Trees snapped at heights no bear could reach. And sounds, low, controlled vocalizations that didn't match any wildlife recordings. When I asked him why none of this ever made it into reports, he just shrugged and said, "Some things aren't meant to be written down." I started digging deeper, this time with intention. Not chasing proof, but context. Old newspaper archives. Forums that disappeared overnight. YouTube channels that were deleted after gaining too much attention. Every now and then, I'd find a clip that slipped through, shaky footage of something moving impossibly fast between trees, or a distant silhouette standing upright where nothing should be. The comments were always the same. Fake. CGI. Hoax. And maybe some of them were. But not all of them. What disturbed me most wasn't the sightings themselves, but the reactions around them. Whenever a story gained traction, something followed. A distraction. A sudden trending topic. A debunking video released within hours, sometimes before anyone could even analyze the original footage properly. It felt coordinated, not in a dramatic conspiracy way, but in a quiet, practiced way. Like damage control. Then there were the emails. People who'd heard I was asking questions. One woman described seeing a tall figure outside her rural home, watching from the tree line for several nights in a row. When she called local authorities, they told her it was probably a prank. The next day, she noticed tire tracks near her property that didn't belong to anyone she knew. After that, the visit stopped. So did her desire to talk about it. Another message came from a former soldier stationed overseas. He claimed his unit encountered something during a training exercise in rough terrain. No shots were fired. No orders were given. They were simply told to retreat and never speak of it again. The incident was erased from official logs. He said the creature didn't behave like an animal, but it didn't behave like an enemy either. It just watched, as if assessing them. As these stories piled up, so did the weight of them. This wasn't just about monsters in the woods. It was about silence. About who gets to decide what's real and what isn't. About how easily truth can be shaped by repetition and ridicule. I noticed how often people laughed when cryptids were mentioned, even when discussing genuine fear. That laughter wasn't relief. It was defense. Sleep became difficult. Every sound outside my window felt sharper. Every shadow seemed to linger a second too long. I wasn't afraid of being attacked. I was afraid of understanding. Afraid that once you see the cracks in the story we've all been told, you can't unsee them. The world doesn't feel smaller when mysteries disappear. It feels smaller when you realize how much is hidden. One evening, I received a message that didn't include a story. Just coordinates and a date. No explanation. No name. I almost deleted it. Almost. But something about it felt deliberate, like a test. I didn't tell anyone about it, not even Mark. I spent days debating whether to go. Logic told me to ignore it. Curiosity argued back harder. Leading up to that night, I noticed subtle changes. Cars slowing near my street. An unfamiliar vehicle parked a little too long down the block. Maybe coincidence. Maybe paranoia. Or maybe that's how awareness begins. Not with certainty, but with discomfort. The feeling that you've stepped slightly out of line, and something has noticed. The location turned out to be another stretch of forest, this one closer to a road but far enough to feel isolated. No warning signs. No fences. Just trees and a narrow trail leading inward. As I stood at the edge, I felt that pressure again, heavier this time. Like the air itself was holding its breath. I reminded myself that I could leave at any moment, that I wasn't obligated to see anything through. But I stepped forward anyway. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. Even my thoughts felt muffled, like the forest was absorbing them. I kept telling myself this was just another place, no different from any other patch of land. But my instincts disagreed. Every few steps, I felt the urge to stop and listen. And every time I did, I had the strange sense that I was being mirrored, that whatever was out there was doing the same. I didn't see anyone else. No lights. No movement. Just the fading glow of the sky as night settled in. Then I heard it. Not a growl. Not a scream. A sound that sat somewhere between the two, controlled and distant, as if it wasn't meant for me at all. It echoed once, then stopped. My phone buzzed in my pocket. No signal. No message. Just a vibration, sharp and sudden, like a warning. I stood there, heart racing, realizing that I wasn't alone in this search anymore. Someone or something knew exactly where I was. And that was when I understood the real danger wasn't finding proof that cryptids are real. It was learning why they're being kept hidden. I didn't move after the phone vibrated. I stood there long enough for my breathing to sound too loud, too human for the space I was in. The screen stayed dark. No missed calls. No notifications. Just that single pulse, like a reminder that I was being tracked in a way I couldn't see. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and listened. The forest had shifted again. Not in sound, but in focus, like everything was pointed toward me now. I left the trail slowly, not because I was scared of what might chase me, but because I didn't want to show panic. Something about the encounters people described kept repeating in my mind. The creatures noticed emotion. Fear drew attention. Calm allowed distance. Whether that was instinct, coincidence, or something learned the hard way, I didn't know. But I tried to move like I belonged there, even though every step said I didn't. Back home, I replayed the night over and over. I wrote everything down, every sensation, every second of silence, afraid that memory would soften it if I waited too long. That's when I realized something unsettling. My notes from that night matched details from reports I'd read years ago. The pressure in the air, the lack of animal noise, the way technology behaved strangely. These weren't random experiences. They were consistent markers, like symptoms of something we don't have a name for yet. Mark stopped replying to my messages after that. At first, I thought he was just busy. Then days passed. Then weeks. When I finally ran into a mutual acquaintance, they mentioned Mark had transferred unexpectedly. No goodbye. No explanation. Just gone. It wasn't proof of anything, but it fit the pattern too well to ignore. People who got too close didn't vanish dramatically. They faded out, quietly removed from the conversation. Another perspective came from someone I never expected. A science teacher named Lena, who reached out after watching one of my earlier videos on unexplained phenomena. She didn't believe in cryptids, at least not in the way people imagine them. To her, the sightings were fragments of a larger misunderstanding. She talked about undiscovered species, adaptive camouflage, sensory manipulation, and how human perception is easier to fool than we like to admit. Still, even she admitted there were gaps science couldn't explain yet. Lena shared something that stuck with me. She said history is full of moments where humans denied reality until denial became impossible. Giant squids, gorillas, even meteorites were once dismissed as folklore. The difference now, she said, is speed. Information spreads fast, and so does control over it. If cryptids exist, hiding them wouldn't require absolute secrecy, just enough confusion to keep the truth fractured. Meanwhile, the emails kept coming. Some people described lifelong encounters, starting in childhood. Others spoke of a single moment that reshaped everything. One man told me he stopped hiking altogether after something followed him for miles without ever showing itself. He said the footsteps never rushed, never lagged, just matched his pace perfectly. When he finally reached a road, the sound stopped instantly, like a switch had been flipped. There were also stories from people who worked behind the scenes. A former emergency dispatcher said certain calls were flagged automatically, rerouted before reaching local responders. She never knew where they went, only that the caller was instructed to stay calm and leave the area immediately. No sirens, no public record, just silence afterward. The main conflict began to take shape in my mind then. This wasn't just about whether cryptids are real. It was about choice. Who gets to decide what humanity is ready to know? Are these beings being hidden to protect us, or to protect something else? Some witnesses believed cryptids were intelligent, possibly territorial, but not hostile. Others were convinced they were being monitored, like dangerous animals. And a few believed the creatures weren't the threat at all, that human interference was. I started noticing how often cryptid hotspots overlapped with military testing grounds, ancient sites, or areas rich in natural resources. It raised uncomfortable questions. If these creatures exist, do they share the land with us by accident or by agreement? And if there is an agreement, who signed it? Not the public. Not the people who stumble into these encounters by chance. The tension followed me into everyday life. Conversations felt shallow. News felt staged. Every official explanation carried the echo of something unsaid. I wasn't afraid of the creatures anymore. I was afraid of how easily reality could be edited, how quickly a truth could be buried under enough doubt. One night, I received another message. This one was different. It came from a block number and contained only a short sentence. "You're asking the wrong questions." I stared at it for a long time. Wrong, not dangerous, not forbidden, just wrong. It suggested there were answers, but not the ones I was chasing. I began to wonder if cryptids weren't being hidden because they were monsters, but because they didn't fit the story we tell ourselves about being alone at the top. Apex predators of a world we barely understand. Creatures that remind us the planet isn't finished revealing itself. That we are guests here, not owners. The forest from that first night started appearing in my dreams. Always just out of focus. Always waiting. And always with the same feeling that whatever was watching wasn't afraid of discovery. It was patient, as if time worked in its favor and human curiosity was just another predictable cycle. I don't know how many people are involved in keeping this quiet. Maybe it's fewer than we imagine. Maybe it's just systems doing what they were built to do: maintain order, avoid panic, preserve control. But control has a cost, and every hidden truth presses back eventually. The more I learned, the clearer one thing became. Cryptids aren't stepping out of the shadows. We're stepping closer to them. And when that distance finally closes, the world will have to decide whether it wants the truth or the comfort of not knowing. After that message, I stopped posting publicly for a while. Not because I was scared, but because I needed to listen. The noise around cryptids was constant. Arguments, debunkings, jokes. But beneath all of it was a quieter layer where the real stories lived. I wanted to hear that layer clearly. I told myself this pause was temporary. Still, part of me wondered if silence was exactly what whoever sent that message wanted. During that time, I noticed how often people reached out asking me to continue. Some were curious. Others sounded worried, almost protective, as if they sensed I was moving toward something dangerous. A few warned me outright to stop digging. Not aggressively, gently, like you'd warn someone about thin ice without explaining what's underneath. Those messages unsettled me more than threats ever could. Then the pattern escalated. My camera malfunctioned during a routine recording. Files corrupted without reason. Audio distortion appeared in places where there should have been nothing but my voice. At first, I blamed equipment. But when it kept happening only during certain topics, certain locations, that explanation stopped working. Technology, like the forest, seemed to behave differently around this subject. Lena contacted me again, her tone more cautious than before. She said she'd been reviewing older research papers, studies that never made it past peer review. Observations of large unknown mammals dismissed due to lack of follow-up. Grants quietly withdrawn. Careers stalled. She didn't say there was a cover-up. She didn't need to. The absence of progress spoke loudly enough. She also said something else that stuck with me. If these beings exist, she said, they're not hiding by accident. Avoidance at that scale requires intelligence, strategy, maybe even understanding us better than we understand them. That idea flipped everything around. What if cryptids aren't being hidden from us? What if they're choosing when and how to be seen? The next message arrived late at night. Coordinates again. Same format. Different location. This one closer to where multiple disappearances had been reported over the years. Hikers who never returned. Search teams that found nothing. Officially, accidents. Privately, unanswered questions. I stared at the screen longer this time. I knew what going there meant. Crossing another line. Becoming part of the story instead of just telling it. I prepared carefully, telling no one where I was going. No live updates. No announcements. Just a backpack, a camera, and a sense of inevitability I couldn't shake. As I drove, the road felt longer than it should have, winding through stretches of land that seemed untouched and watchful. Radio signals faded in and out. My phone lost service miles before it should have. The farther I went, the more the world felt stripped down to essentials. The location was a narrow valley, surrounded by dense forest. The air felt heavier there, thick with moisture, and something else I couldn't name. I remembered how witnesses often described a sudden shift before encounters, a moment where everything felt wrong but still. I felt that now. No birds. No insects. Just quiet that pressed against my ears. I didn't go deep at first. I stayed near the edge, observing, waiting. Hours passed. Doubt crept in, telling me I was chasing ghosts, letting imagination fill the gaps. Then the ground vibrated faintly, like distant movement carried through soil instead of sound. I froze. The vibration stopped. Started again. Slow. Intentional. I raised the camera, not expecting it to capture anything, but needing to try. The screen flickered, then stabilized. Trees stood motionless. Shadows pooled between them. And then, just at the edge of the frame, something shifted. Not stepping forward. Not retreating. Just adjusting its position, like it knew exactly where the camera was pointed. My heart pounded so hard, I was sure it could be heard. Every instinct told me not to move. Not to speak. Not to react. The feeling wasn't panic. It was pressure. The same awareness I'd felt before, magnified. Whatever was there wasn't hiding. It was allowing me to notice it. I thought about all the stories. The watchers in the woods, the silent observers, the intelligence behind the eyes no one could quite describe. This wasn't a creature lunging from the dark. This was something patient measuring. As if it had been here long before roads and cameras and curiosity. Then another sound joined the first. From a different direction. Not identical, but related. A response. My mind raced through possibilities I didn't want to consider. One creature was unsettling enough. More than one changed everything. The valley suddenly felt smaller, like a bowl I'd stepped into without realizing how steep the sides were. The camera cut out. I whispered a curse under my breath, tapping the screen, but it stayed dark. At the same moment, the pressure intensified, like the air itself had thickened. I realized then that documentation might not be allowed here. Or worse, it might not matter. Proof assumes an audience. But what if this moment wasn't meant to be proven? My phone vibrated again. This time, there was a message. You're close now. No explanation. No sender. Just confirmation. My throat went dry. Close to what? The truth? The boundary? A mistake? I scanned the trees again. Heart racing, senses overloaded. Shapes seemed to form and dissolve at the edge of vision, never fully committing to visibility. The forest felt layered, like multiple spaces overlapping in ways I couldn't quite process. I took a step back, then another, careful not to turn my back completely. The ground vibration stopped. The silence returned, heavier than before. I had the sudden sense that something had changed, not in the forest, but in me, like a door had opened that wouldn't close again. As I reached the tree-line, I felt it one last time. That awareness. Not hostile, not welcoming, just present. A reminder that this wasn't over. That whatever I'd encountered wasn't a single event, but part of something much larger and much older. Driving away, my hands shook on the wheel. My mind replayed every second, searching for meaning, for certainty. But certainty stayed just out of reach. And maybe that was the point. Maybe cryptids don't reveal themselves to be understood, but to remind us that there are limits to what we control, what we explain, what we're ready to face. As I reached the main road and signal returned to my phone, notifications flooded in. Missed calls, messages, warnings, and one final text that made my chest tighten.
They know you saw them.
I didn't reply.
I didn't need to.
Because deep down, I already knew this story was moving towards something inevitable. And whatever comes next won't stay hidden for long.
I didn't sleep that night.
Every time I closed my eyes, the valley came back, layered and watching. When morning finally arrived, it didn't bring relief. It brought clarity. Whatever I'd stepped into wasn't a one-time encounter. It was an initiation. And the message on my phone wasn't a warning meant to scare me away. It was confirmation that the boundary between observer and observed was gone. By noon, the video files from my camera had partially restored themselves. Not all of them. Just fragments. Seconds of footage that didn't connect properly, like someone had cut out the center of a conversation and left only the edges.
Trees.
Shadows. A sudden shift in light. And then a frame that made my stomach drop. A distortion in the air, shaped like something tall standing just beyond the clearing. Not visible in a normal sense, but present, bending space around it. I hadn't imagined it. Something had been there. I sent a single frame to Lena without context. Her reply came faster than I expected. She asked where I got it and whether anyone else had seen it. When I told her, she went quiet for hours. When she finally responded, her message was short and careful. She said similar distortions had been recorded before, always near clusters of cryptid sightings, and always followed by sudden data loss. She also said something else that felt like the ground shifting beneath me. She believed some of these beings might not be fully physical all the time. That idea rewrote everything. If cryptids exist in a state that slips between visibility and absence, it explains the lack of clear evidence. The footprints that start and stop. The thermal signatures that vanish. The feeling of being watched without ever seeing a face. It also explains why certain technologies fail. Cameras, radios, GPS, as if the rules we rely on don't apply evenly in their presence. But the real twist came later that evening.
Mark called me.
His voice sounded strained, like he was speaking from a place where he couldn't relax. He didn't explain where he'd been or why he disappeared. He went straight to the point. He told me that the areas I'd visited weren't random. They were monitored. Not constantly, but enough. Certain patterns triggered attention. Repeated questions. Repeated locations. Repeated names. He said my name had come up more than once. I asked him who was monitoring these places. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he asked if I'd noticed how quickly official explanations appear after sightings go viral. How often authorities already seem prepared. He said it wasn't about hiding creatures from the public. It was about managing encounters, controlling escalation, making sure things stayed balanced. Then he said something that changed everything. Some cryptids, he said, are known. Not officially, not publicly, but internally. Cataloged, observed, studied from a distance. Not hunted, not captured, avoided. He said there are rules about engagement, and breaking them has consequences. Not just for people, but for the creatures too. That's why certain witnesses are silenced gently. That's why areas are closed quietly. Not to deny reality, but to prevent conflict. I asked him why he was telling me this now. He paused for a long time before answering. He said because things were changing. Sightings were increasing. Patterns were breaking down. The distance between us and them was shrinking. And people like me, who were paying attention without trying to exploit it, were being noticed on both sides. After the call ended, I sat in silence, replaying every moment from the forest, the valley, the messages. The second plot twist hit me all at once. The cover-up wasn't just about hiding cryptids from humanity. It was about hiding humanity from cryptids. If these beings are intelligent, territorial, and aware of us, then uncontrolled exposure works both ways. Cameras don't just capture them. They announce us. Our noise, our expansion, our curiosity, it all leaks into places that were never meant to be crowded. Maybe the silence wasn't to protect us from panic. Maybe it was to protect them from us. That idea raised the stakes beyond anything I'd considered. Because if that balance breaks, if cryptids decide hiding is no longer necessary, there won't be a press release or a calm explanation. There will just be more encounters. More disappearances. More moments that can't be explained away. Later that night, I received another message from the same block number. You've been misdirected. Attached was a map. Not of a forest or a valley, but of multiple locations across the country, all marked with dates.
Some were in the past.
Some were in the future. The dates ahead were close. Too close. Whatever was coming wasn't theoretical. It was scheduled. I zoomed in on one of the locations and felt my chest tighten. It was near my city. The realization landed hard. This wasn't about chasing mysteries anymore. The mystery was moving toward us. Toward populated areas. Toward places where silence would be impossible to maintain. And suddenly, all the warnings, all the controlled narratives, all the quiet erasures made sense. The final escalation wasn't that cryptids are real. It was that they're adapting. And someone somewhere knows exactly when the next boundary will be crossed. I didn't share the map with anyone. Not Lena. Not Mark. Once you understand how information moves, you learn when to stop feeding the current. Instead, I watched. I compared the marked dates with recent reports, emergency closures, unexplained outages. The alignment was too precise to ignore. These weren't random hotspots. They were pressure points. Places where whatever balance existed was thinning. The date closest to my city was 3 nights away. I tried to convince myself nothing would happen, that this was another layer of misdirection, meant to pull me deeper. But the signs started appearing anyway. Power fluctuations across neighborhoods near wooded areas. Reports of animals acting strangely, clustering where they normally wouldn't. A sudden spike in maintenance closures, announced without explanation. The language was familiar now.
Vague.
Reassuring. Empty. On the night marked on the map, the air felt wrong before anything happened. The sky was clear, but sound didn't travel normally. Sirens seemed muted. Even traffic noise felt distant, like the city had been wrapped in cotton. I drove toward the edge of town, not knowing exactly where I was going, only that every instinct pointed in the same direction. That's when my phone rang. Mark again. This time, there was no hesitation in his voice. He told me to turn around. He said whatever was about to happen wasn't meant to be witnessed. That observation changes outcomes. That attention alters behavior. I asked him if this was about protecting people or protecting secrecy. He didn't answer. Instead, he said something I didn't expect. They're not all the same. He explained quickly, like time was slipping. Some cryptids avoid us. Some observe. A few, he said, respond to expansion the way any species would, by pushing back. Tonight wasn't an invasion. It was a correction. A boundary enforcement. And the reason authorities knew the date wasn't because they controlled it. It was because they were warned. I parked anyway. From the tree line beyond a closed trail, I felt it again. That pressure, stronger than ever, but different. Focused. Coordinated. The forest wasn't watching anymore. It was active. The ground vibrated faintly, not from movement, but from presence. Like something large shifting states rather than steps. Shapes began to form at the edge of perception. Not fully visible, not invisible either. Distortions in space, like heat ripples bending moonlight into outlines that refused to settle. More than one. Spread out. Holding ground. My fear wasn't sharp anymore. It was heavy. Respectful. I understood then why witnesses struggled to describe what they saw. Language fails when things don't behave like objects. These beings weren't emerging. They were allowing overlap. And then I felt it. Not words. Not images. Intention. Not hostile. Not welcoming. Declarative. This area is not empty. That realization hit harder than any scream ever could. This wasn't about cryptids hiding from us. It was about coexistence being strained by ignorance. The cover-ups, the ridicule, the silence, they weren't just tools of control. They were buffers. Crude ones, but buffers nonetheless. Humanity had been kept unaware not because we couldn't handle the truth, but because we don't listen well when we think we own everything we touch. The climax didn't come with chaos. It came with stillness. Lights across the nearby neighborhood flickered and went out, then slowly returned. No explosions. No attacks. Just a moment where the rules bent, then snapped back into place. Within minutes, helicopters circled farther away than usual. Police blocked roads without explanation. Social media filled with confusion that would be dismissed by morning. And the forest settled. The presence withdrew, not vanishing, but stepping back into alignment. The pressure lifted just enough for my lungs to remember how to breathe normally. I stood there, shaking, understanding that I'd just witnessed a negotiation I wasn't invited to participate in. When I got back to my car, my phone buzzed one last time that night. You've seen enough.
No threat.
No promise. Just finality. In the days that followed, the official explanations rolled out smoothly. Equipment failure. Wildlife migration. weather anomalies. Everything fit just well enough to satisfy people who didn't want to look closer. Lena confirmed her lab had lost access to certain datasets overnight. Mark disappeared again, this time without even a transfer story. The main conflict was resolved quietly. The boundary held.
For now.
But the final twist came weeks later when I stopped digging and started reflecting. Reviewing old footage, old messages, old instincts I'd ignored. That's when I noticed something I couldn't unsee. The first time I ever felt that pressure, truly felt it, wasn't in the forest. It was years earlier, in a crowded place, dismissed as anxiety. A moment of being watched with no source. At the time, I'd laughed it off. Now I recognized it instantly. Cryptids aren't only in remote wilderness. They never were. They're in the margins, the overlaps, the places where we assume nothing else could fit. The cover-up didn't just hide them from us. It hid how close we already are. And the real twist wasn't that they're adapting. It's that they've been adapting longer than we have. The balance hasn't broken yet, but it's thinner than anyone wants to admit. And the next time the boundary pushes back, it may not do so quietly. Because now that I've seen the truth, I understand something far more unsettling than monsters in the woods. We were never alone. We were just late to notice. After that night, life didn't snap back into place the way I expected. It settled differently, like furniture rearranged in a dark room. You can still move around, still function, but you're always aware something has changed. I stopped chasing new locations and stopped answering most messages. Not because the curiosity was gone, but because the purpose had shifted. I wasn't trying to expose anything anymore. I was trying to understand what responsibility looks like once the truth stops being theoretical. The questions that haunted me at first slowly found their answers, not all at once, but in pieces. The reason sightings were increasing wasn't because cryptids were multiplying or becoming aggressive. It was because the spaces between us were shrinking. Urban sprawl, deforestation, constant surveillance, noise that never stops, all of it was pressure. We weren't being invaded. We were intruding, and the response was measured, not violent. That realization stripped away the fear and replaced it with something heavier: accountability. Lena eventually reached out one last time. She told me she'd change her research focus. Not toward proving cryptids exist, but toward understanding coexistence and perception. She said science doesn't always fail because something isn't real. Sometimes it fails because the questions are wrong. Her career would never be the same, she admitted, but she sounded at peace with that. Some truths aren't meant to be published. They're meant to be lived with carefully. As for Mark, I never heard from him again.
But I stopped worrying about that.
In a strange way, I understood his silence now. He wasn't disappearing. He was stepping back into a role that requires restraint. Someone has to stand between curiosity and consequence. Not as a gatekeeper of secrets, but as a caretaker of balance. I realize there are people who know just enough to keep things from tipping too far in either direction, and they carry that weight quietly. The public, of course, moved on. Viral stories faded. New distractions took over. That was always going to happen. Humans are good at forgetting things that make us uncomfortable. But forgetting doesn't erase impact. It just delays reckoning. The key difference now was that I no longer felt the urge to shout into the noise. The truth didn't need a megaphone. It needed patience. I returned to the forest months later, not to investigate, but to walk. No camera, no phone, just quiet steps and attention. The pressure never returned. No vibrations, no distortions. Just trees, wind, and the subtle sense of sharing space respectfully. That alone felt like confirmation. Whatever those beings were, they responded to intent as much as action. Curiosity had weight.
So, did restraint.
The biggest question people always ask is whether cryptids are dangerous. The answer is complicated, but simple at its core. They're not monsters waiting to attack, and they're not myths meant to entertain. They're part of a larger ecosystem we barely understand. Like any intelligent presence, they react to how they're treated. Fear escalates. Respect stabilizes. Ignorance creates conflict. The cover-up, if it can even be called that, was never about lying for control alone. It was about buying time. Time for humans to mature, to learn humility, to stop assuming that everything unexplained is meant to be conquered or captured. Was it handled perfectly?
No.
Silence breeds mistrust. Ridicule harms witnesses. But chaos would have been worse. Panic would have forced reactions that couldn't be undone. The final takeaway isn't that cryptids are real in the way movies portray them. It's that reality is bigger than our categories, bigger than known and unknown. The world still holds intelligence we didn't create and don't command. And that shouldn't terrify us. It should ground us. I still feel that awareness sometimes, usually in quiet places or crowded ones where people forget to look at each other. A reminder that we're not the only observers, that our actions ripple outward, even when we think no one is watching. It doesn't feel threatening anymore. It feels instructive. If you take anything from this story, let it be this: truth doesn't always demand exposure. Sometimes it asks for responsibility. The question isn't whether cryptids exist. The evidence has been there for those willing to see it. The real question is what kind of neighbors we want to be on a planet we never owned. The boundary is still there, thin but holding. And as long as curiosity walks hand in hand with respect, it might stay that way. The forest will remain quiet. The city will keep humming. And the hidden parts of the world will continue to watch, not in fear, but in patience. We were never meant to uncover everything at once. Some truths reveal themselves only when we're ready to stop reaching and start listening. And that, in the end, may be the most human lesson of all.